Hello and welcome back, or welcome if you're new. If you're new here, my name is Elena. I'm the homeschooling mama to 3 kiddos. Here on the channel, we talk about everything from homeschooling to homemaking, all the things in between. From the title, we're going to talk about our July reads. As of right now, we've just gotten through the first week of July. I'm trying to take a peek at my calendar way far away, thinking that I can read that far away. It is the 7th, and I've already finished 5 books. Now, 2 of these books for sure I started in June, and one I think even before then, and I just put it down. So that's not, that part wasn't a huge one. And then the last 3 books were e-reads, and I did not feel my best the beginning of the month. So I had some more down mandatory rest time. When you're not feeling well, that's what happens. But bonus points because you have more time to read. So the first book that I read this month was The Courtship Plan by Kathleen Fuller. This is an Amish of Marigold novel. This book was a digital read. I checked it out from my library. It was kind of a sweet read. It is about this town who somebody puts out an advertisement that there is this small Amish town where all the eligible bachelors are anxiously looking for wives. And so it draws the attention of young single Amish women who are looking for husbands. And this tells one of the stories of one of the ladies who comes to the town in hopes that they will find a husband. Now, the person who put in the ad, we find out who put the ad in, and we find out that it was done as a prank, but it worked out for some of the women. For some women, it didn't seem to work out so well. So in this particular case, we are following along with Charity. This is a dual point of view. We follow Charity, and then we get glimpses of Jesse, who is the male in this, the male lead in this book. And Charity has come to town in hopes of finding a husband. Jesse is this good-looking guy, and Charity is not as physically attractive, I guess, as some of the other girls in the town. And so her and Jesse have a misunderstanding, and Charity ends up moving away. And then, lo and behold, Jesse goes and ends up moving, and who should live in this new town but Charity as well. And so we follow along their story, and we find out who put the ad in the paper, their intents behind it, and Charity gets to express her feelings on being one of the women who was kind of duped by the ad. All in all, it was a sweet read, so I'm glad that I picked it up. The next book that I finished was An Amish Kitchen. This one I purchased from one of our local libraries from the used bookstore. This one is a couple of short stories by Beth Wiseman, Kelly Long, and Amy Clipston. So like I said, I did start this book months before. I actually started this in April, so I read the first story in here, and then I put it down and never picked it back up. So I picked it back up because I wanted to get it off my currently reading in my Storygraph app, and so I finished the last 2 stories in here, and they were sweet. I don't usually pick up short stories because when I dive into a book, I want to stay immersed in that world for a while. I really like book series because of that reason too. I think once we find a good storyline and characters, I just want to kind of hang out in that world. And so short stories are a little bit more difficult for me, but I'm glad that I picked this up and I read it. The back of the book has it's got some recipes in it that go along with the different stories, so it's kind of neat to have on hand. I may try one of the recipes, I don't know, but we'll see. But I finished that one up. It was a book that was easy to pick up and put down. You don't have to read them all at once. The characters, they kind of overlap, but not so much that you would feel left out if you read the stories out of order. Then next, I picked up another Kathleen Fuller book. Instead of one of her Amish reads, I picked up Hooked on You, and this is part of the Maple Falls series. This is book 1, and this one takes place in a smaller town. Riley has dreams of becoming this world-renowned artist living in New York, and she has to come back to the small town to help her grandma out, and her grandma's yarn store. So in coming back to the small town, she bumps into some people she went to high school with, some she were not really in her circle, we get some new characters in as well, and Riley just struggles with some very real things. I thought this book was also sweet and endearing. The grandma in this book is this southern older lady, and she is just so much fun. She does have her own errors and mistakes that she's made, and she comes and she just wants the best for Riley. She wants Riley to come move back home, and so she has some schemes and then learns to back off a little and just let God do what he does. I liked the book so much that I picked up the second book almost immediately after finishing the first. The second book is Much Ado About a Latte, and it follows another person that we meet in that first book. So the first book really kind of introduces all the characters, and then throughout the series, Riley's circle, we go through each of the girls' stories. And so the second one is about her dear friend Anita. Anita is a waitress in the town's diner, and she has a longtime crush on Tanner, and Tanner does kind of oblivious to it. Tanner is just trying to work hard, provide for his single mom. He lost his dad at a young age, and he takes very seriously his role of taking care of his mom and his brother. And so he's kind of very goal-oriented, and doesn't, even though he has attractions to Anita, he doesn't really let himself act on those. There's also a tiny bit of fake dating in there. That story doesn't go for very long, but there is a tiny bit of fake dating, and of course some misunderstandings and a little hidden things, but not to the point where you're just super frustrated with the lack of communication. There is communication between the characters. I think sometimes when you have miscommunication, and it can be solved so easily with just like one conversation. It's frustrating to read, but this book didn't leave me feeling this way. We follow Anita as she just has pining for Tanner. She works at the diner. She wants more for her life. She wants to do and prove herself to her family, and in doing so, she decides that she's going to open a coffee shop. At the same time, Tanner is making plans for the diner where he is just an employee but hopes to purchase it. And so now they're kind of almost rivals, but they both have these hidden feelings for each other. And we get to see these feelings come out, like I said, in the little bit of fake dating that we see, but that plot line doesn't last very long. It's a good book. I know I'm probably doing a horrible job at explaining it, but it's a sweet book. I am going to pick up the third book in the series, but I put it down for a second because then I picked up an actual book instead of an ebook. I revisited the Elm Creek Quilt series. I picked up the Elm Creek Quilt series as a reread at the beginning of last year of 2023, and I never finished it. I only had like 4 books left to go, I think. And then Jennifer, I'm going to say her last name wrong, Chiavarini, she came out with another book for the series at just this month, or the end of last month. And so there's one more book on this series. The series had been done for quite some time, and then I picked it up on a whim last year, and then this year she came out with another one. And so I have to pick up that one. But I did pick this one up to continue on with this series. This one is The Union Quilters. I think it's like book 17 in the series, so it's a pretty long series. But this series, it's a series in that it kind of jumps in different places and different times. So it doesn't continually pick up the story. Sometimes we go backwards in the timeline. The first book talks about Sylvia, who is returning to her home, and she hasn't been there for a while. She is a quilter, and she meets a young lady, and they kind of start their own quilting circle, and it follows their stories. And so we learn about Sylvia and her family, and this new young girl that comes to work with her, and like how their stories merge and how they begin this. And so they start this quilt camp, and one of the books has to do with one of the characters in their circle. Sometimes one of the books will have to do about some of the ladies that come to the quilt camp, so it kind of jumps into different things. So you could read some of these as a standalone. This particular book, The Union Quilters, does take place during the Civil War, and so it jumps backwards in the timeline and has to do with Sylvia's great ancestors. And these ancestors are introduced in previous books, but you could very well pick up this book and read it as a standalone as well. This book was a little bit more difficult for me to read because it takes place completely during wartime. Sometimes that can be a little hard to read with so much sadness and just, gosh, I don't know, it's just so much sadness. And I feel like that can be such a hard period to write about as well, but all in all, I'm glad that I read it. I know this is a reread for me. I've read it before, but I wanted to reread the series in order again and actually finish it. And so this is where I had left off. The next book in the series is The Wedding Quilt, and that jumps forward in time. So we're going all kinds of different places. But like I said, this one just takes place during the Civil War. Some of the women, I don't know if you need trigger warnings to know about the Civil War. I think that just kind of covers a lot of things when you know that that's what the book is about. But I think that she handled it as best as she could writing it. She didn't shy away from some of the tougher matters that were happening. And to see it from the ladies' perspective, and we get multiple points of view from the different ladies in the older sewing circle. And so I thought that she just wove this story together into her series quite beautifully. And like I said, I'm glad that I picked this up, and then I will be picking up the next one, The Wedding Quilt, to continue on with the series. That's where I'm at right now. Hopefully this will be a good reading month too. I mean, hopefully I get better and it's not a good reading month because I stay sick all month, but you know, I'm just hoping that we get to pick up some more books. So let's see what we read next. Okay, we're battling the air conditioner again, but it is hot and it is going, and it is what it is. So today is actually, I think it's the 29th. We only have 3 days left of July. I don't foresee me finishing any books, but who knows. So let me recap the rest of the books that we read. I did end up finishing The Wedding Quilt. It was the next book that I had in the Elm Creek Quilt series. This book jumps forward in the timeline. I think I went over this, but it jumps forward and quite some time. And it kind of talks about future generations. Well, it does talk about future generations. And it was interesting to see what happens to some of the original members, where they're at now. They have children and what's going on with their children. If you weren't vested in this series, I would not pick this one up like as one of your first books. I would definitely read some of the others first, because this one kind of ties everything. It's nice to have the background stories. You could read this as a standalone, but I think you would get more out of it if you had read the other books first. You don't have to read all of them first, but I would definitely at least read the first one first. Then I finished up Grit Don't Quit. This is by Bianca Juarez Olhoff. This was for part of my 75 Soft Challenge, but I also wanted to pick this book up. I've been wanting to read it for a while, and so I'm glad that I did. I read this as an ebook version from our library, and I really enjoyed it. I feel like if you read this book and also listened to Candace Cameron Bure has a podcast, and she had Bianca on there as a guest, and I feel like they walked through the chapters of the book as well. It would be a really nice pairing. So in this book, it is a faith-based book, and so if that's not your cup of tea, this may not be for you, but if that is, then I definitely recommend this book. It talks about resilience and just the grace and strength of God, like the things that we can endure and just continue running our race. So this was a good book. And then, like I said, I would definitely pair it with that podcast if you haven't read it yet or heard the podcast. You can actually do either one, of course, separately, but together I think it would be magnificent. I listened to the podcast first, and that's how I became introduced to the book, and then I went ahead and finally picked the book up. Then the next book I finished up was The Reason I Jump, One Boy's Voice from the Silence of Autism. This is a book that is translated, and I will put the name up of the original author. I really don't want to mess it up. And then their translator, well, put the whole book picture up for you. This book is told from the perspective of an autistic child. As the mom of an autistic child, or a child on the spectrum, this really just pulled heartstrings and touched me emotionally. I don't know what to say about this, honestly. I don't want to tear up, but I did reading it and just kind of understanding. So the way the book is set up is there's like questions that he is asked frequently or is asked of autistic people, and he tries to answer it to the best that he can. And the way that he wrote this book, it was a labor of love. It was time consuming. They had to create a special typewriter for him, and then that's how he was able to answer the questions. But hearing it from his own voice and hearing it from that perspective, and just a lot of the overlying message in the book that I received was not to give up on them and to have patience with them. And it just, I mean, it was a beautiful read because, like I said, it is very personal for us. So I would highly recommend this if you've not picked it up yet and you just want some insight. I just would highly recommend this book, honestly, for anyone, especially if you have someone in your life that is on the spectrum. This is just such a great opportunity to hear from their side that you may not always be able to hear, or they may not always be able to put into words. So that book was amazing. Then I picked up the next two books in the Honeybee Sisters trilogy. Sorry, I'm trying to hold too much stuff on my lap here. I started them as digital books from our local library. Sorry, I'm still trying to get myself together from the last book. Okay, so I started them as digital books, but then our library had the last two books, and so I went ahead and picked them up just so that I could have the physical copy. And my intent was to go back and forth between the digital read and the actual book, because sometimes it's more convenient to read the digital read, and then sometimes you just want an actual book. But I actually just ended up reading straight from these little books. Little in size, but not in story. And so, like I said, the first book, I give you that summary thing here. The second book follows the next sister. This is the next one, A Bee in Her Bonnet. And this one follows Poppy. Poppy is the second sister, and she has been, it says, outrunning boys and standing up for picked on children ever since she was a girl. No matter how much prideful, arrogant schoolmate Luke Bontrager, no matter how much Luke insulted her. And so, of course, Luke and Poppy are the two in the story, and it's kind of an enemies to lover. It's an Amish read, so they're not really enemies, but it is a sweet story. Again, the aunt in here is just hilarious. I feel like she saves the books. She shines in the first book for me, just saves the first book. And then I think the second and the third book kind of hold their own, but she's present in all three. And so this one tells the story of Poppy, and Poppy is a little more feisty, and as an Amish young woman, that's not always seen very well. And so we kind of go into Poppy's story and why she feels she has to, I want to say why she sticks up for people or why she's outspoken, but it's not really that. That's kind of just her personality, but how that can be a little bit tough for her in this community, and how I guess eventually in the end she kind of comes to grips with it. And Luke, even though in the very beginning he is kind of standoffish about that sort of thing, the way they just kind of come together is sweet and endearing. And then the last book, Like a Bee to Honey. This one follows the baby of the sisters, and that is Rose. Rose is the quietest of the sisters, and she is really shy. She actually talks very rarely to males in the community. She just kind of keeps to herself and her sisters and her aunt and their honeybee farm. Throughout all three books, there is this sort of mystery happening too, and we find the conclusion of it in Rose's book, in this last book here. There is someone that is threatening the sisters and the farm that they're on, and so we find the conclusion here. But the mystery carries through all three books. And so this one, like I said, it talks about Rose, and she is the quietest, and we kind of find more about her clearly, but also why she is so quiet, why she feels like maybe she's lost her voice a little bit. And her, of course, interest is Josiah, which is the three friends. There are three friends, three sisters. It's kind of cute. But Josiah has had this long crush on her, and because Rose is so shy, he's been so nervous about speaking to her. He wants to take it very slow. He doesn't want to scare her off, but at the same time there's this mystery happening on the farm, and it just ties up ends. And I thought these were really just great, sweet, endearing books. Again, if you're just looking for an escape, if you're looking for a good read, like a cozy up read, I would definitely recommend these. And then another nonfiction book I finally finished. I finished Parenting by Paul David Tripp. I have been reading this one with one of my friends, and then I really wanted to finish up reading it. So we were reading it pretty slowly, but these are 14 gospel principles that can radically change your family. This book starts off very, very strong. There are so many things, I think, just as a parent that you're like, wow, yes, and amen, and there's so much richness in it. And then somewhere right before the last few chapters, to me, it just felt like it got really repetitive, and I was kind of like, well, are you gonna, like, he had really still solid points, but I felt like there were points that he had already made in the book, and I was looking for something else. And honestly, I might have skimmed more over those chapters had it not been that I was reading this with a dear friend. And we were taking it chapter by chapter, reading it together. So I pushed and read, and then I'm so glad I did, though, because the last few chapters, like the last 2 or 3, I think really brought it back again for me, and just had great insight and great teachable moments for parents. It is not a parenting book in the style that they give you ideas of practical things to do. There are a couple towards the very end, but it is more of a heart matters and gospel, and just remembering that we as parents are also sinners, and that we can look to our children to kind of almost right our wrongs. We want to, of course, we want them to be better than we were, right? We want them to have more, be more, do more. Want them to have more opportunities, to be able to do more in life. I think that's kind of a common thing with a lot of parents, but also we don't want them to struggle with the things we've struggled with, and that can be difficult, because when you see your kids struggling, you want to jump in and you want to save them, and you want to fix it, and you sometimes really have to stand back. Or on the flip side, when your kiddos are not behaving and the sinful behavior is coming out, it can be really, really hard not to take that personally. And so he dives into a couple of these things, and like I said, just those last the chapters kind of towards the middle of the end of the middle, because it's not the very ending chapters. Those ones I felt like were really good too, but get kind of slower. But all in all, I would say pick it up. It is worth the read. There are some really great nuggets had in here. And then the last book that I read, More Than Words Can Say. This is by Karen Whitmire. This is actually part 2 of the Patchwork Family. It looks like it's just a duology for now. I don't know. But my libraries did not have the first book available, so I just went ahead and took a chance and read book 2 first. And I'm so glad I did. This was a kind of a historical fiction, or yeah, it is considered a historical fiction on Storygraph. A historical fiction romance. It's marked emotional, lighthearted, and fast-paced. There is a marriage of convenience in here, a sort of found family, faith. It just, again, another feel-good book. There are parts of it that are actually, when I say a feel-good book, I mean that it ties up quite nicely in like one of your favorite comfort movies might. This book is about Abigail Kemp. She is the owner of a bakery since her dad has passed away. She's been tending to the bakery and taking care of her little sister, and they have been caring for their father, who fell ill. Their mother had passed years back, and now that the father has passed, the town has dug up an antiquated law that says women cannot own a business, and so they give her this period of time where she either has to sign the business over to a male business partner, or she can sell the business. Abigail intends to fight this and decides she's going to find herself a husband, and a husband who has to sign a contract saying that he's going to just marry her so that she can keep the bakery, but he has no rights to the bakery. So he doesn't get any say-so in it. She wants it to be hers, and she wants to run it. And so that's where the marriage of convenience comes in. But she is on a very small timeline to make this happen. And then we find a little bit more about why this antiquated law was brought up. Somebody has kind of a personal vendetta against her, and the history between these two women is really sad and heartbreaking, and that gets brought back up, and we finally learn what happened, as well as for her husband. He has a backstory, and that backstory for him goes in further, I guess, in the first book via his sister. So that wasn't clear as mud for you. I do want to see if I can get my hands on the first book to read it, because I loved this book. But I really enjoyed this book. In fact, I rated it 5 stars, and if you've been hanging out with me this year, you know that I have not been rating my books this year. Only when I really feel like it. I think I rated like very few. I just at the end of last year felt like I was rating books because every book needed a rating, but I was putting this like immense pressure on myself, and then I feel really bad if I couldn't give a book, like if I had to give it a 3 star, I felt like really bad for the author, like the author even knew who I was or cared. So I decided this year I'm not going to rate the books unless I really feel called to. So this one I really enjoyed. I don't know. I think it was just like the perfect timing of the book, and then just the style and the writing was so great, and the story. It kept me reading it. I read it in just a couple of days, so really liked it. I want to find more by her and see if that continues. I hope so. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Let me know what you're reading, if you've read any of these, if you liked them, if you didn't, and if you have any recommendations for me. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate you taking your time out and spending it here with me.